To start off, I went through those doors in July of 1993 when I was a governor's fellow under Governor Wilder. I'd just gotten out of college, and I became a governor's fellow as like an intern that you do with a cabinet level person, but they would take us on these field trips, and one of the places they took us to was here. And I don't think they just brought us here because it was a prison. They wanted us to see a prison. They wanted us to see the death chamber. And back then, we didn't have lethal injection. All we had was the electric chair. And they walked us through. They took us to a geriatric ward. They took us into the death chamber. And I'm pretty sure the tour was given by Jerry Givens. And, the chair was sitting right there in the middle of the room. And I can't tell you the impact it has on you to be in that room, to see that device, to have to think about how many people sat in it, not only in that room, but also in the Richmond Penitentiary. And, I looked at that time, and all I could think of was sort of disgust, revulsion, eventually, reflecting on it, really sort of dismay and embarrassment about how I felt like my state was operating. And I never thought I'd be back here today doing this, I can tell you that. It definitely motivated me in terms of my personal views. It gave me something to think about and to motivate me as a legislator. But I never dreamed that Virginia would change as fast as it did. When I was first elected in 2009, I was elected about 6 months after Delegate Herring. That first session we served in the 2010 General Assembly, one of the hardest votes we had to take that session was to expand the death penalty. One delegate was carrying the trigger man rule. And I think myself and I think Delegate Herring and about maybe 20 other members voted against that. But about half our caucus voted to expand the death penalty that year. And that's sort of where public opinion was. It's where the parties were at that time. Being against capital punishment was not a popular position in 2010. I remember going into one of my first debates as a candidate that year, being afraid that I was going to get asked that question and worrying about how voters might react if they heard that I was against capital punishment. But I never got the question the entire campaign cycle. But we were in a very different place, even in 2010. And 2014, I heard somebody else from the Capitol Defender Service give a speech about the history of the electric chair, and so I put in a bill to make the electric chair to try and prohibit that in Virginia. And I'm not even going to get into the history of that, but it's a truly sordid one. And of course, that bill didn't go anywhere, but it sent the message, and it got the Virginians for Alternatives, the VADP, more motivated that we could actually maybe start to do something. 2015, we had the lethal injection secrecy rules that we beat back that session. 2016, they ended up passing, so we could continue to use lethal injection, but we fought it. And then this last session, I thought we might have a chance to actually pass this. And I remember Senator Locke, our caucus chairman, called our meeting in when we were in Harrisonburg trying to figure out some of the things we were going to take on as a caucus. And I said, what about capital punishment? There was about, I'd say, between 5 and 7 members that didn't feel comfortable taking that on yet. And that was just 2 years ago. And I worked on them one at a time. And eventually, we were able to get the votes together to get it through. And I think if we had tried last session to get it on the floor, it wouldn't have passed. But this year, I think, was the year. And I think Governor Northam's endorsement made a big difference for people, along with George Floyd and a few other things that have happened in this country over the last 12 months. But, I think what keeps people up at night about this largely is 2 things. One is the history of this in Virginia, and the other thing is the innocent. And I was reading, Virginia's history on the death penalty is really ugly. And it doesn't get written a lot. It needs to be written about more because people need to understand what the history is. And right before I came here, I was looking around. I read an article about the Martinsville 7. And in that article, it talked about how between 1908, when Virginia instituted the electric chair, and 1948, when the Martinsville 7 were convicted, Virginia had 808 white men who were convicted of rape. Not a single one of them got the death penalty. But 45 black men were executed for rape. Not a single white man who committed 808 rapes, not a single one. That says to you a lot about what death penalty was used for. In fact, Senator Locke talked on the floor about you saw a direct correlation between the rise in the death penalty in Virginia by the government and the end of lynching. The connection is really undeniable. And that's the history. That's where this comes from. And some people argued on the floor that, well, we've got the Capitol Defender Service, we figured out how to do this. The problem is the innocent. And that is the one argument that nobody ever countered on the floor. We had this argument for 2 hours in the Senate. Not a single person could say, how do you justify killing one innocent person for every 9 guilty people that you execute? Nobody can justify that. And that's, I think, what has really caused a lot of folks to come around on this issue, the exoneration issue, because we realize we just can't get this right. So the reason it makes people uncomfortable is because of our values and our history. I started this morning at my home. On my way here, I stopped at Gunston Hall, which is the home of George Mason. George Mason he attended the Constitutional Convention, but he refused to sign the U.S. Constitution because it didn't contain a Bill of Rights. George Mason wrote the Virginia Declaration of Rights in June of 1776, before we declared our independence. And in that declaration, we declared for the first time in the world that we as human beings have certain rights against our government. Freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion, but we also have the right to trial by jury. We have the right to subpoena witnesses. We have the right to cross-examination. We have the right to not be compelled to have testimony. We have a right to a jury of our peers. We have a right to speedy trial. We have fundamental human rights, fundamental rights in our justice system. And I started there this morning because to pay homage to George Mason, to our Declaration of Rights that was eventually became our U.S. Bill of Rights in 1883. Because as somebody put to me the other day, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a federal prosecutor. He says what we finally figured out here is that we finally figured out that we can no longer, while some people may feel very angry when a murder is committed, when somebody may feel that morally there may be some reason, I don't feel that way, but some people feel there's morally a reason to use this kind of sanction, it is fundamentally impossible to utilize this type of sanction in a country like ours that values fundamental human rights the way we do. It is impossible to use this remedy. It doesn't work. It's impossible. It doesn't comport with our current values. And so from my point of view, with what Governor Northam is about to do in a few minutes, is he is going to restore Virginia to its position of leadership, not just in the country, but also in the world, as a society, as a government that values civil rights, that values your rights against the government, that values things like your rights to trial by jury, and your right to confrontation, your right to be notified of what you're being charged with. This restores us to a place of prominence in the world, makes us a leader in justice, which is where our state originally was in 1776 when we came into our existence. And so that's why I'm so proud to be here with the governor, with my co-patron, Delegate Mullen, Delegate Plum, who put in the bill in 1980 to repeal capital punishment. I'm sure he's finally here to see this done after 31 years. It's a very important day for human dignity, for fairness, for justice, and I'm proud to be part of it. Thank you so much.